Well, welcome to our November 2021 College Autism Network Virtual Association of Scholars, or Canvas meeting. I'm Brett Nackman at College Autism Network. See many returning folks to our community today on this Friday afternoon or morning for some folks too. Evening probably for folks, for our European colleagues on the call as well. We have a great presentation in store today by Dr. Mary Baker-Ericzen, and we're going to get right to that in just a few minutes. But just in case this is a first Canvas meeting for anybody here, we have these monthly, and these are opportunities to exchange resources, get to know other folks who are in the autism post-secondary education community, and hear a really compelling presentation from someone in our space, whether they be a researcher, practitioner, self-advocate, educator, or any combination of those stakeholder groups as well. As mentioned, feel free to enter any thoughts or questions in the chat. The presentation will encompass most of the time, but we'll have some time at the end toward Q&A. So please do make sure to have some questions in store for Dr. Baker-Ericzen. So a few notes before we get started. In case you don't have the agenda available to you, I'm going to pop that in the chat for you. We just welcome you to add your name and information. Just that's easier for us in documenting things for our meeting. We know many of you are part of our Canvas listserv. Please make sure to do so if you're not already, because that's how you're going to hear about our forthcoming Canvas meetings, as well as a number of different research studies that are in development by many members of our community. Sometimes it's also sharing an article or a resource, and there's always really good content in store there. At this point, we definitely welcome space for folks to share resources. We know some of you are conducting research studies right now and perhaps want to share information with folks. So you can see that there's a space in the agenda for adding that. Otherwise, you're welcome to put information in the chat or speak up as you'd like to. I wanted to start off and make reference that there was a good little piece recently on the Stanford Neurodiversity at Work program, which has been increasingly more robust in serving autistic students' transitions into employment. Certainly, we know a number of these programs exist, and the article offers a bit of perspective into the good efforts there. So there's a hyperlink to that in the meeting agenda. But I'm going to now turn it over to the individual who is actually adding a piece right now in Journal of College Admission. So if you'd like to talk about that, feel free to do so.
Oh, that was me. I don't really like to self-promote, but I just thought it might be an article that people would enjoy if they hadn't seen it already. Just about encouraging colleges to include disability and neurodiversity in their definition of diversity. Because I tour a lot of colleges and speak with a lot of colleges, and the definition of diversity is often much more narrow than that.
Well, thank you for sharing, Eric. Always glad to have you on and share those pieces. Anyone else want to mention anything? I guess it's a little bit of a quiet bunch on a Friday. I know that there's lots of good things happening in this community. I know also many of you were at our College Autism Summit, and I realized I skipped over that. If anybody had any reflections on that or experiences or things you liked, things you'd like to see different moving forward, we can also have some space allocated toward that end now too. Well, I think it was really an exciting opportunity to have the summit again virtually. And we definitely had folks from all around the world, and we had a lot of self-advocate representation, which was really good to see in terms of folks talking about their experiences attending college. And I know we had folks from just students from so many different universities and community colleges as well. So I think that's been a really encouraging element of the summit as we've gone forward over the years. Were there other highlights that maybe stood out to folks in having attended the summit, or things you heard about it?
I just love how every time I interact with the College Autism Network, I end up walking away with like so many new connections and networking. So I feel like I'm still having meetings with people that I met at the last summit. So it was great.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, it's worth noting too that Jess is one of our inaugural recipients of College Autism Network, our Summit Awards, and as an outstanding researcher. So we're really excited to be able to celebrate that at the summit too. Kristen mentions in the chat, loving the UC Davis Aggie student presentation. That's great to hear. And Lydia X.E. Brown's keynote was fantastic. Yeah, it definitely was very compelling. And I should add that our summit guru coordinator, Lee, is on the call as well. So if you have any feedback or things you want to share with Lee, this is also a good mechanism to do that. I also want to mention too that we got a lot of great feedback, very helpful feedback too in our surveys that many of you would have received following the summit. So that's definitely going to propel our efforts moving forward. So we really value that as well. I do see that there is another resource being added to the meeting agenda right now. So if anybody with the individual who's entered that would be interested in commenting about it, feel free to do so.
Hello. I did the good thing of making sure that my microphone was still off when I coughed. Across in the UK, we've, in the last year or so, there has been Arriving at Thriving, which was a publication that came out from our Higher Education Commission. And particularly, it is putting the responsibility and advocacy for change for things like specialist autism mentoring and all accommodations actually at pro-vice chancellor level of our universities. It seems to be starting to work, which is just an amazing step in accountability. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
I seem to have a thing. 1 second. There it goes.
Anyone else have anything to offer or share? Okay, well, if anything comes to mind, feel free to add it to the chat. So at this point, let's transition over to our featured presenter today, Dr. Mary Baker-Ericzen. So holds a variety of roles, including as a research professor at San Diego State University, operations director and research scientist at the Child and Adolescent Services Research Center, director and clinical psychologist at the Intricate Mind Institute. I'm sure I'm not even covering all of them, Mary, but we were really glad to have you here today to talk about the College Success Program, which stands for, as I understand it, Supported Comprehensive Cognitive Enhancement and Social Skills Intervention. So we appreciate your time, and feel free to take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. And it is very thrilling to present today at this group, and such a group across the world, which is always so amazing. That's the wonderful thing of technology. I put all of these affiliations on here just so you guys have a little bit of kind of where I'm coming from and what my biases may be. It kind of just presents that I am a community services researcher, but I'm also an active clinical psychologist, and I have a practice, and I'm actively working as a clinician on a daily basis, or well, almost daily basis as well. So that's where my lens is coming from in developing this program, as well as how I'll be kind of talking and presenting today. Up, and let me see, it didn't progress. There we go. So I'm just going to do a real quick rundown of what executive functioning and social cognitive communication functioning is. Give you a quick overview of our curriculum, and present some of the different findings we have. And I just wanted to note that I've inserted some illustrations through the presentation that were all created from participants in the College Success Program, as we asked them as one part of kind of an evaluation of kind of, you know, if they're comfortable to give us an illustration of their outcomes or what they thought that the program meant to them. And so you'll see those kind of scattered throughout as well, and they all have really important meaning. So as Brett just mentioned, college success being an acronym. And so the acronym is really trying to capture what's involved in the program, but it doesn't do a great job of capturing. Some of the language we chose was because we like the acronym of success and worked backwards. So we don't really like the term social skills, but it gave us those double S's for the word success. And so we'll explain what we like instead when we're talking about components of the social nature. And I wanted to also note that this program was developed through a community-based participatory research model and approach, which meant a full village, all contributing to every aspect of the program. Oops, I went forward, but so we had autistic individuals and family members, but also administrators, providers, teachers, researchers, etc. And this slide popped up all by itself because I guess it just really wants to be known of. This is a little bit of what we view as behind the scenes, that we feel that the program with our community direction, it was a very important drive of it to be a self-determination kind of focused program. And so I pulled this quote from Dr. Seuss that to me feels like a really nice illustration of self-determination, is for each person to really be their own decision maker, including what works for them as we're kind of introducing information and different strategies, although we don't call them that, we call them moves. And we say, like, what move would you like to make in your life, and what makes sense for you, and how do you do that, as well as gearing towards individual goals, and really always trying to have each person take information that's learned and make sure it fits for them, is really big principles in the background behind the curriculum. So the curriculum is what we call focused on soft skills, and we actually came out with the very first version of it to be employment focused. So we have an employment success program, and then our community was saying, well, that's only one aspect of need for individuals. Why can't we also address college and the fact that unfortunately many individuals on the spectrum were not graduating with the degrees they were pursuing in college, and our local data was showing that as well. And those findings, as many of you know, were really devastating, because it was getting to about 30% were finishing with the degree that they were pursuing. So we went and we kind of reapproached the employment success, realizing we could keep most of the content from in terms of the constructs that was first developed for employment under soft skills, and that those were really still all very applicable to the college situation, college setting as well. And then we just did a lot of making it terminology to be applicable for college. But we also know many college students are working or certainly pursuing work too. So our community realized, let's keep some of the work language also. And so that this is where we are. And just a side note, our community then also said, but we want the high schoolers to start off and learning and kind of being able to access some of this stuff. So we have now a third version for transition age youth to be delivered in high school, but I'm only going to be presenting information today about the college version. So soft skills, for most of you already know this, but it's really an integration or an inclusion of both executive functioning as well as these social, cognitive, and communication skills. This is a definition, came from just sort of the populace, our good old internet global definition of soft skills. So it's certainly not anything within a realm of disability. And they call it social graces in this particular definition. So we then started to go out into the literature, and it was rather rich. In a lot of other populations, it just wasn't that rich within autism literature, looking at how do you address executive functioning, how do you define it, but also what could be done to enhance it. And so we really went to the restorative type of literature. So that comes a lot from schizophrenia literature, brain injury literatures, even dementias. And we also went to the compensatory sides of the literature and started to integrate both those in what we are viewing under executive functioning. And executive functioning is very difficult to define exactly, and many people have different viewpoints on what that might be, all the aspects of it, because we call it a package. So we defined our package of executive functioning with these particular skills within it. So sustained attention, and what I put on the right side here is just a kind of what sometimes you hear in global community as people talking about some of these skills, just to, again, kind of remind us all that we've all been needing to use our executive functioning skills pretty much, throughout our life, certainly all through adulthood. And our community has all kinds of phrases and its own cultural based lingo to talk about these kinds of skills. So that's what I kind of put in these quotations in red, is just a reminder of what people sometimes say related to these executive functioning skills. So sustained attention, we included inhibition, so that, kind of the holding on to something that you think about for a minute first before acting. We've included particular learning and memory skills, particularly to kind of organization within your own brain, to be able to bring that information back up, rebuild it, recall it, and use it at any given moment. Cognitive shifting, to be able to shift what you're thinking about and even shift within a kind of an attention span. The flexibility, so being able to think differently at any given moment. That also gets intertwined within problem solving, because that's how we help ourselves be able to generate with a plan B when plan A doesn't work within a problem solving model. So certainly that's a part of things, and we included that as well. Contextual awareness, being able to just kind of pick up all those different context clues that are around, and that's got some overlap with the cognitive shifting, of course. our goal-oriented thinking, being able to kind of generate a goal, but also then be able to break it down and figure out what's the plan and how do you prepare and how do you do it from a step-by-step approach. And then the prospective memory is remembering things in the future, right? That dentist appointment that comes up every 6 months. Who's supposed to remember that? And a lot of these prospective memories is when we use those compensatory strategies, those workarounds, that good old cell phone with the calendar in it that keeps those kinds of things as our second brain, is how we'll, kind of talk about it sometimes, because our primary thoughts are not going to remember 6 months ahead for an appointment on one particular day. But using a form of technology certainly can be an important part of that. So that's kind of the area that we're really focusing on in terms of executive functioning. And we break each of these down into kind of individual chapters, but you can see they're really enmeshed, right, and interconnected. So it's a little challenging to teach sometimes, but we thought we would take the approach, let's teach them one at a time, but keep reminding folks that they're all additive and intertwined, but that way our community said it feels more digestible if we kind of break it down. But some of these certainly are not new. We also then transition, we start with executive functioning skills, and then we transition into talking about social cognitions. And certainly perspective taking is a very important part of our view of social cognitions in our world. But we also like to think about it with a few more focuses. It is the ability to think about the minds and mental states of others, plus, right? Plus a lot more. We certainly, again, went back to the literature and pulled from social psychology as well as cognitive neuroscience. And looking at all of these different aspects from different populations that have been working in this area, and look to see how can we apply it with a more disability or autism lens. And so we ended up with defining social cognitions and communication within these sets. And again, just like executive functioning, it's kind of this umbrella of lots of these things that kind of come and get somewhat intertwined. So we certainly have perspective taking as one component of it. And again, the red text is kind of like what that saying might be in it, kind of in a cultural lens of describing it. Social awareness, being able to kind of know kind of what's going on. That has also that intertwinedness with the context awareness, but it's got a little heavier focus on just the social component to it. Social knowledge, sort of knowing what you're supposed to do at any given moment based on that context. And that's constantly changing because how we say hello to a professor is very different to how we say hello to our classmate. And you got to, again, intertwine these kinds of things to know what's the so-called way to do it. But that's also part with awareness and context awareness. Emotional awareness is one that we present much more kind of at an internal. So are you kind of aware of what your own feelings are and feeling able to manage it in that moment, or hang on to it for a bit so you can manage it later when you're in a place that's more amendable to that. And then social communication. So again, kind of within those conversations and those discussions, like how do you adjust and how do you do it maybe a little differently, again, based off of these other factors that are even executive functioning ones, like context awareness. So we ended up pulling all of this stuff together. We used 2 curriculums as some bases to adapt, and then we added it. We kind of enhanced from there. So we were pulling from compensatory cognitive training by Liz Schwamley, and the social thinking and behavior mapping from Michelle Garcia-Winter and Pamela Crook, who focused a lot more on kind of youth, and these folks were all collaborators on this project as well. It was so wonderful to work with all of these people. And we came up with these kind of 26 classes. And when we were testing it in the feasibility studies, we realized it really needs to also be tailored to the schools, and the schools are doing it differently. So some of the campuses ran the groups as groups through disability or accessibility services. Some ran them as courses, but as like non-credit courses. And we are right now going to pilot it in spring as a 4-credit course. As many of you know, that takes some time to get on the schedule for a 4-credit course. So we weren't able to do it up until now, and we'll see how that goes. And so if it got fit into a semester, sometimes it was more frequent and kind of higher dosage per se per week. Some people preferred to do it as a group, like I said, and had less dosage per week, but it drew out over time more, and it crossed 2 semesters or sometimes a semester in the summer. So there's lots of variation. Those who ran it as groups tended to be kind of on average about 6 participants. One site went as low as 4. Those who did it more as a class tended to be on average about 10, but there was one that had a class of, I think, size of 15. And so there, again, some variation there. And each class has a psychoeducational component, a hands-on component where we're doing activities in the class and having lots of discussion. And then there's these assignments. When they're groups, they don't like to view it as homework. So we call them try it and apply it. And it's just really to take the material and go out and see how it works for each student in their own space. We attempted to have lots of, well, we have lots of visuals in there, and I should say we attempted to add some humor in as well. Sometimes I feel like I found the joke funny, but nobody else did, so that's okay. And it comes with a workbook that goes along where it's got some self-help style to the workbook, so that they can write their own and individualize it even further for themselves. So here's just a kind of big overview of the content. So in the green, that's where we kind of define those as the executive functioning focused content. The yellow, that context awareness, really is kind of an intermix between executive functioning and social cognitions. So we use that as a bit of a transition time. And then the red is kind of our social cognitive and communication focused content. And then we also have towards the end, some other important content of self-advocacy, networking, social media usage, and then we wrap things up at the very end, and how to integrate all of this together. So this flow seemed to be pretty important. We have not done dismantling type of studies. We've really studied it just as one giant package to this point. But I'll start to kind of show you a little bit about how we do it, and we'll jump into some outcomes here too. And yes, feel free to jump in or put things in the chat. I know I'm going quickly. I prepared material for a time that I was confused and thought I had longer, so I know I'm talking at rapid pace here. But this is, I just want to kind of start to show some of how we're using visuals and trying to develop as we're calling logic model approaches to most of this curriculum, especially the social aspect of it. And this was a lot of work with our collaboration of going through, how do we break these concepts down? These, they're big, they're intertwined. Some feel rather abstract. And so we thought, well, if we could create as many of these logic models with these visuals as possible, that might be helpful. And so this is just one that we're teaching this aspect of how important it is to adjust a social communication and how you interact with somebody, including like what you say and even your spacing of interact with somebody. the nonverbals you use. And you have to kind of make that adjustment all based off of this social interaction type. And what we're saying that what a social interaction type is, something on this continuum between formal on one end and very casual on another end. And then something in between can be blended, right? So sometimes you could be interacting with a professor who we would view it as formal. However, it's maybe office hours, or maybe it's sitting even at, at a bench outside. And so now it starts to shift its formality to be more of a blended, because the setting is casual and the situation is more casual. And so then it starts to shift. So we present on how do you figure that out? Well, there's these some elements to take into account. So we say the relationship is one element. Is it an equal relationship, you and a classmate, your peers, you're kind of on a so-called equal level, or is I'm sorry, that's what we're talking about with role. For the relationship, we start with, do you know the person, and if so, how well? So this kind of familiarity. So if it's a professor you've had for a couple classes already, that's going to be a much higher familiarity and knowing the person, versus the professor in a class that you just started, right? Then there's going to be an unknown feature. And so we have somebody kind of figure out, like, where on that does a person lay for relationship. And then we look at role. Is this a hierarchy role, a professor or student, or is this something maybe a little more equal of to classmates and to students or roommates? But even sometimes in that, right, some classmates might have a little higher status than others, again, or in a dorm or so. So that also, you got to kind of figure out. You got to figure out the context clues. Are you in a formal setting? Is it a class time, or is it something outside of class that's less formal? And you're evaluating each of those, and you're adding them together, and then that helps you figure out a social interaction type and where on this continuum. And then each of these kind of blend into the next content. And so now we're saying, okay, now you've got this social interaction type. We also teach, how do you figure out somebody's perspective? You add those together, and now you can figure out how should I interact with this person, and what kind of spacing? Like, do I go stand near them because it's more casual, or do I give a little more distance? There also might be cultural components that get added in here too, nonverbals. What kinds of things do I use, and even my language. Do I use a title or not? And so it helps a person figure all this stuff out with just taking in some of this information. This is another kind of model that we use that's really kind of focused on then having to figure out, like, being able to predict this social outcome and or even understand if it went well or didn't go well. How do you kind of break it down and figure out why did that not go as expected? And what happened here? What were my intentions? What were the other person's intentions? How did these interact and connect? And again, each of these are kind of described and then kind of built up together to encompass this whole kind of logic model here. So just a little bit of illustration on how some of this material is presented and approached. So I'm going to jump into some of our data. So our college success study, these were feasibility studies, so there's no randomization that occurred. So this is all open trial type information. But we did go across a number of different campuses and different types of campuses. So we have large university settings like our University of California, San Diego, our San Diego State University. These are very large public universities, Cal State University, San Marcos. We also had smaller community college, or sometimes people call them junior colleges. And so we had a few of those participate as well. This is a sample that's a kind of a nice clean sample that I'm presenting on today of 25 students across some of these different campuses. The mean age was 22 years, but there's nice range, as we do always see on campuses. we do see the higher rate of male gender participants, which often we do see in autism studies. Our ethnicity, we had 36% Hispanic. We are a border community with the country of Mexico, and so our population in San Diego is getting a little closer to 50%. So we're a little bit less representation there. And then we had a number of different races. We really made the program open to anybody in college at any year, and we really saw that we had people from all different kind of levels in their college years. So first year, second year, third year, you can see, and even including graduate level of master's and doctoral. And we didn't see any difference at all by college year. A lot of them were enrolled in their college disability or accessibility service programs, but not all. Some actually ended up through the program kind of seeking out enrollment because they realized they could get some additional supports that way, and that's great. And then we see kind of the spattering of what other services they're actively using, but this is not what's needed. So we saw a real discrepancy of what they're actually getting versus what they kind of wanted and needed. And I think that's something that comes up an awful lot too. And the majority of them are living at home with family as well. So I just try to stick a lot of the outcomes together, and then I'll present a couple other slides on the other sample just so you can kind of see how these measurements work. But for the sake of time, I just kind of wanted to show that we had really strong effects for feasibility study and in both report measures, self-report measures, as well as the kind of the facilitator or the professor who might have been teaching the class also reported. And a lot of these samples, we also asked the parents to report, even though they knew nothing about what the curriculum was and they were not involved at all. So they were really just this sort of distal reporter, since a lot had regular interactions with their parents. And then in this original study, we also did these observation type measurement tools. So the challenge task to look at executive functioning, and the SPA, the social skills performance assessment, to look at some of the social, cognitive, and communications, which are little role plays that are done that get coded, etc. And we saw improvements even on those, which was really amazing, especially within kind of a 6-month time between pre and post. And I think what we enjoyed the most was that participants were reporting that they liked the curriculum, right? The satisfaction was quite high as well. So we had some other great just kind of case stories talking about some of their own personal goals and what was accomplished, which I just is so nice to see. A lot of folks really took on the self-advocacy role a lot. And got involved in autism awareness on campus and diversity awareness and things, which was really great to see. And that was not a specific target at all in the curriculum. A few more illustrations of how people viewed this program and kind of just what they visually indicated. And you can kind of see that they highlight some of the components that was particularly interesting for them. And then during this COVID shutdown time, we actually had this opportunity. We were already going to pilot test it in a university outside of our county, so that we were not so close at to all of it. And so the College of Marin, which is in Northern California, which for many who may or may not know about California, it really is almost operates like a separate state. Can be quite different from Southern California and Northern. So we thought that would be a nice test of it. And then COVID hit and everything went online. So we ended up with this kind of two functioned feasibility test of can it be done with somebody that we just kind of train and we're not a part of it? And can it be done online? And we did have to change activities to make them, online accessible and the materials and things. But it was then, it kind of fell into our laps as a really good opportunity for a natural lab. And so this sample was all at the College of Marin. That is a community college or junior college type of campus. The gender, again, our mix was predominantly males. We realized our ethnicity question, we didn't word it very well. So we had a lot of people saying, I'm not sure, or unknown, because it kind of mixed in with race. And again, it was primarily autism population, or they all had autism, but they also had some other conditions that they were reporting on as well. And here you can just kind of see these measures. I broke them down a little bit more visually, and I know I am going fast through these, but the brief measure is a standardized self-report, as well as they have versions for other reporters to look at the executive functioning skills. And the stars are indicating significant change. And this is unfortunately a deficit-based measure. So it's saying how many executive functioning problems are there. And so when we see change, it should be a lower bar. So the green is that post, it makes it a lower. But what I think also becomes kind of quite interesting from the students' report perspective is some of them were rated for themselves so many problems that it was in this clinical range, or right on the border of that clinical range. And post, they started to feel like we all still have these problems, but it was then based off of this measurement tool, falling closer to the normative range and be below, right, the clinical, which I thought was quite meaningful. We also then kind of flipped it on them to ask, well, what about these strategies that you're using? Again, in the curriculum, we call them moves. What move are you going to make in life is kind of how we view it. And that was because we learned from our group that they hate the word strategies, and it's just like overused, overdone. But unfortunately, on the measurement tool, we kind of still had to ask, but we asked specific things that were taught, and we see that, yes, they're reporting a much higher usage of those post participation. And then we asked the facilitator or the professor who was working with the students also to rate on them, and they are seeing it from another perspective, right? So they're saying, yes, this person is using these strategies a lot more, and they could see them, there was some kind of proof from an observation level. And then our social measures, the social responsiveness scale, many of you are familiar with. We saw that change, and we saw it going into a closer to a normative level for anything that was elevated, which is got what we might call clinically meaningful change, not even just statistical. So that is always really encouraging. And then again, that flip side where we're saying, oh, are you using these social moves? And we see, yes, right, these much even greater usage of them. And again, from the facilitators viewing that too, like, yeah, I can see all of these things happening in the classroom and interactions that I have with the person in other areas. Academically, they started to report some changes there too, with like less missing of assignments and less getting lower grades than they wanted, is kind of how that was framed. And they felt that they were interacting with their classmates more and being involved more on campus. So those were two particularly, or four areas of particular change, which was nice. Interestingly, they reported they were late to class a lot more, so I don't know. But that was also the pandemic, so maybe it was hard to get online, and maybe there's connection problems. I'm not sure. But again, really high satisfaction. That's also, that to me becomes a very, very important. Great quotes. They didn't have anything that they felt was not helpful. Not the little bit of feedback on change, but mostly just kind of praise, which is so nice to see. And then the facilitator, the professor, now this because this sample is just one facilitator, so keep that in mind, but facilitator was really thrilled. But what was nice was, again, this is somebody that we don't know, right? This was a distant person. So we knew we had, potential bias of having people like our program that was around here who was a part of it, but this is a different site. So that was nice to hear that somebody who had not been a part of developing it and never heard about it still liked it. So real quick, our lessons learned. The social communication and cognitive part needs more time. We've learned that. And the students request more time to talk about those kinds of things. We did see lots of change in non-targeted areas, which is really great. We did see a lot of confidence boost, and they talked a lot about the confidence boost, which is really great as well. We also saw this effect, though, that they prioritized it much lower compared to their credit courses. And that's part of why we're now going to pilot it for course credit and getting units for it this spring, because they would say that, tell us to, like, I got to focus on my classes to pass, and this gets pushed aside. We saw that now, because we've done a few more things, that it is likely effective for many neurodivergent, and we have lots of students who are saying, I just want to take the class, and that the facilitator or professor needs some training. It's not just a pull off the shelf, kind of go and use. And really cool that it appears to be equally effective for in-person or online versions. So those are all thrilling things. So let me see if I can jump into the chat and respond to some of the great questions.
Yeah, Mary, you have several of them that are great. And the first one is from Kirsty, who says, regarding outcome measures of improved executive functioning, were those maintained or were they just measured at the end of the study?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't have follow-up data at this point, but it's a really important question, and I would really love to have follow-up data. So that is something we are definitely looking into, is, how can we gather that maintenance data. We do have follow-up data from our employment success version that goes 3 months and 6 months out, and we are seeing maintain gains in many areas, and then some areas still more improvement. So that's encouraging, but we don't have that data yet for the college.
Beth wants to know, will you be able to provide links to this report?
Yes, I will do that. Yes.
And you're welcome to share that with me, and we can always put it out via the listserv too to reach a wider group. Sasha asks, I was wondering if you have time, if you could describe this CBPR process. How are the autistic individuals involved in the research process?
Yes, great question. And so that CBPR is that community-based participatory research. And so they were technically on the grant. Most of our community members were paid consultants, but what they did was we actually met weekly, and we started with like, what should we do at a very broad level, and then we as the research group brought in ideas from literature in terms of what about focusing on this content and this content. And in these weekly meetings, people started to give feedback of what seems of importance and whatnot. And so that's kind of how we got this outline of all the content. And then as we started to pull from some of the other curriculums, like I said, that we adapted, we would take that curriculum and we would work with it to say, does this make sense? And is this the words we should use? And is this the language? And this was all done in these groups, these weekly meetings. And so we went through that process for about 1.5 years in developing the content and looking at all the images and the pictures, and so page by page basically was developed on a week-by-week basis.
Thanks, Mary. Next question is from Brianne. is the 4-credit course something that is funded by the college itself through student tuition?
So that's how we're designing the new test. So yes, so we have it as the first trial this spring. That is student tuition. We're also piloting another component of it this spring where it's a full inclusion course. So yes, folks with neurodivergent brains are being made aware of it, but anybody kind of is it's open to all, and we're also allowing undergraduate and graduate students to also take the course together. The graduate students have a few extra components that they need to do in the course, like a course paper, et cetera, to meet those requirements. But we're really piloting this as a true inclusive form of the course as well. So we'll see how that turns out.
That sounds great. Denise, credit to you on amazing amount of work. Clearly you did a lot here. Just curious, how did you recruit autistic students? Could you speak on your outreach to obtain participants?
Yeah, so we had, because of the community being so much a part of it, we had connections already with each of our campuses here in San Diego. And so the campuses were either identifying students that they already knew and reaching out to them and letting them know about this opportunity. They were distributing flyers about the opportunities. And then we had family members who just heard about it through some of our local presentations, who were then kind of encouraging their own adult child to also participate. But it was all volunteer participation, and then they got paid for answering the questions and completing all the research assessment tools and data. But they did not, there was no payment to deliver the curriculum or to participate in the curriculum. That was all, had to be kind of their own interest and choice. But we did pay for any time it took to fill out any measures.
Great. We have a couple more questions to quickly address. From Bertrand, is the material available for translation? We'd be interested to test it in France.
Well, that sounds very exciting. We're just finishing up kind of all the copywritten aspects that need to be in place for broader distribution. So we're hoping that that's all going to be wrapped up by 2022, and then it'll be available for other campuses and people to be involved in it. And translation sounds very exciting. We haven't gotten to that part yet, but we're happy to talk further about possibilities.
And Brian's will be our last question for today. Picking up on the facilitator's comment from earlier, is there scope for teaching such a curriculum more widely? And as a corollary, extending teaching neurotypicals understandings of autistic modes of communication?
Yeah, really great point. So, the real quick on the first one, that yes, we are right now in the process, like I said, of getting all the copywritten, I don't know, all the stuff I don't know anything about, but the university does, taken care of so that we can make it available. The second question, I guess we're kind of playing with that a little bit. I don't know if that's the right word to use with this next trial of having it an inclusive delivery, where these other groups up until this point were all autism population groups. And so I think we'll be able to talk about that a little bit more with this inclusion approach, and does it serve as a function for the non-autistic population to understand things better? And I think that's a really great question. And I would love to figure out what measures to use for something like that too, because we have not thought that through enough.
Well, you covered a lot of ground here today, Mary. We really appreciate your time and your contributions, and certainly giving such thorough perspective into the college success program. So Certainly we can share your information with the community more broadly following today. So if we can all just put in the chat, thank you, or virtual applause. And yeah, and this is our last Canvas meeting of the calendar year. So as many of you know, we will be taking December off and have a whole full slate of exciting programming for January and moving forward. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Mary Baker-Ericzen. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Please stay tuned via email for meeting minutes and a video recording of today's presentation, as well as in the forthcoming weeks, details about our spring 2022 slate of Canvas meetings. And we'll see you right back here very soon.
Thank you, everyone.